Hey guys, thanks for joining me in the third video where we're talking about the three components of controlling your exposure. If you missed the first two videos on f-stop and shutter speed, make sure to check those out too. In this video, we're going to be talking about ISO, and then I'm going to go over the different shooting modes on your camera to help you get the best picture possible. The third component you'll use to change your exposure is ISO. This basically determines how sensitive your camera is to the light you're letting in. The higher your ISO, the more sensitive it will be to the light, making your picture brighter. The lower your ISO, the darker your image. While raising your ISO higher gives you a brighter image, the downside is that it creates more grain or noise in an image. Check out the following examples of noise levels increasing as the ISO gets higher. This first image was taken with a Canon 40D at ISO 100. You can see at this ISO there really isn't much noticeable grain in the image. Here we have it again at ISO 200 and again at ISO 400. If you look closely, you can see the noise in the image getting a little more gritty as we raise it to 800. And now let's bump up the ISO to 1600 on the same camera, which is the highest ISO a Canon 40D can have. You can probably see at this ISO how gritty this image gets. Here's the image at ISO 100 again to show you the difference in the noise. So keep in mind when you're raising your ISO to make your image brighter, you're also creating more noise in the image. Using ISO doesn't create any effects in your image like motion blur or background bokeh, but what it affects is the quality of your image. So generally you want to keep your ISO as low as possible for your exposure. As a rule of thumb, you can usually leave it at ISO 100 whenever you're shooting in broad daylight. So let's recap the three components to controlling your exposure. Shutter speed, how long the shutter is open. Aperture, how wide the lens is opening, and ISO, how sensitive your camera is to the light you're letting in. Any of these three can be used to let in more or less light, so remember how each setting is affecting your picture and when to use them to your advantage. So when you're trying to get the perfect exposure, the first question is, what do you want perfectly exposed? In a silhouette picture, for example, you're trying to get the best exposure on the beautiful colors of the sky while your subjects are completely dark or underexposed. In this next picture, you can see our subjects are exposed nicely, but we've completely overexposed the sky behind them. So you can see that your exposure will always be different depending on what part of your picture you'd like perfectly exposed. Now let's talk about the different modes your camera has and how much control you'll actually have over your picture in each mode. The easiest and most basic mode is full automatic, which is normally indicated on your camera's dial with this square shape here. Check your camera's user guide to see where the automatic mode is for your specific camera model. With your camera on automatic, the light sensor takes in light across the entire frame of the picture and calculates a good exposure, which means you have no control over how bright or dark your image is. And like our earlier example with the window, having a bright light in your picture will make the sensor think there's too much light and you'll get an underexposed image. In automatic mode, your camera also chooses the f-stop, shutter, and ISO for you, which means you have no control over the motion blur, the depth of field, or the amount of grain in your image. In this mode, your camera will also automatically focus for you and might not even focus on your subject. And lastly, if you're in low lighting and your camera has a built-in flash, your flash will fire automatically and you won't be able to control how much flash you get based on how much you actually need. Check out these two images taken at the same venue and same time of day. The first image was taken with an SLR camera on automatic mode, and the second image was taken with an SLR camera on manual mode with the user controlling the settings. You can see what a difference it makes when you take your camera off the automatic settings. In the creative modes, you have a little more control than auto. The two we're going to cover are aperture priority and shutter priority. The aperture priority mode will usually be called AV on your camera dial. In aperture priority, you can choose the f-stop and the camera will choose the shutter speed to go with it. You can also change the ISO in this mode. Aperture priority is best used if you know you want bokeh, but you want the camera to figure out the rest of the exposure for you so you don't miss the shot. And as a step up from automatic mode, where your camera decides where to focus for you, in this mode you'll be able to use the focusing dots you can see through your viewfinder that look like this. These dots allow you to set a specific point for your camera to autofocus on so you won't have to manually focus every picture. If you look through your viewfinder and push your shutter down halfway, the dot that's blinking is where your camera is going to focus. When all the dots are lit up, it means your camera will choose a selection point for you. Check your camera's quick start guide to find the button that will allow you to change your selection points, and turn the dial to select the point you want to focus on. With people as your subjects, it's usually best to put it on the person's eyes to ensure they're in focus. When you push the shutter down halfway, it will autofocus on that spot, then you'll push the shutter down the rest of the way to take the picture. These focusing dots can only be used in certain modes on your camera. The next mode we're going to talk about is called shutter priority mode, usually indicated with a TV on your camera dial. In shutter priority, you can choose the shutter speed and the camera will choose the f-stop to go with it. In this mode, you can also change the ISO, and you'll be able to use the focusing dots to focus your image. Shutter priority is best used if you know you need a specific shutter speed, but you want the camera to figure out the rest for you. In both aperture and shutter priority, you can have a little more control over where the camera is reading the light by changing the light meter settings. This allows you to tell the light meter whether to read the light from a specific point, a general area around that point, or from the entire picture. Again, check your specific camera's user guide to see where you'll change these settings. In these modes, you can also adjust the auto exposure settings so the camera will calculate its exposure at a higher or lower level than normal. To do this, you'll look through the viewfinder and hold your shutter down halfway while turning the dial that adjusts your automatic exposure to be higher or lower. Even with these features, you're still limited when your camera decides how to expose your picture for you. In automatic, aperture priority, and shutter priority, you can end up with several different exposures during the same photo shoot, and you'll have to go back and try to fix them all in your editing. You'll find that shooting in these modes is pretty restrictive and can cause several problems in low lighting conditions. Using an automatic exposure indoors can leave you with motion blur when the camera uses a slow shutter to let in more light. Because you don't have full control over the exposure, you can also end up with images that are too dark or grainy. Automatic modes can also cause your flash to fire automatically rather than allowing you to adjust your settings manually to take advantage of the natural light in the room. The only mode in which you can have full control over your picture is manual mode. As we mentioned earlier, manual mode is usually indicated on your camera's dial with the letter M. Again, check your camera's quick start guide to find the location on your specific camera model. With your camera on this setting, you can change your f-stop, shutter, and ISO to any number you want. Shooting in manual allows you to decide what should be exposed correctly, whether or not you want motion blur or bokeh, and how much higher you should bump the ISO before getting too grainy. It also allows you to set up your exposure once for one setting so you can keep a consistent exposure throughout the photo shoot where there aren't any changes in lighting. Shooting in full manual may seem daunting at first, but after a while it will become second nature. The best way to learn full manual is to get out there and practice, practice, practice. So your next assignment is to take a picture in manual mode where you adjust the shutter, f-stop, and ISO to get the best exposure possible. Take a picture both inside and outside. Go ahead and pause the video now. Okay guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video explaining the different shooting modes on your camera and how to control your exposure. Hopefully you're feeling comfortable shooting in manual mode so you can get the most out of your DSLR camera. Make sure to join me in the next video where I'm going to talk about how you can avoid those yellow-toned images indoors and the blue-toned images you often get outdoors on cloudy days or in the shade. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.